All right, it's Thursday morning and a few days before Pesach. And since we're inching so slowly into Yechezkel, and we won't be meeting next week on Chol HaMoed Pesach, I didn't want to pass up the opportunity to learn together today. So thanks for all those who were able to join. Chapter 2 is very short, and I think we're going to break with convention and read the first few verses of chapter 3 because if you thought chapter 1 ended on a cliffhanger, chapter 1 of Ezekiel, which was the Maaseh Merkavah, the vision of the divine chariot, the seat with its four legs, with the four faces on each side, and the wheels, etc. It ends on a kind of a cliffhanger because a voice is heard in the end of chapter 1, but we don't know what that voice is going to say. Chapter 2 picks up with what the voice says, but then at the very end of chapter 2, we have a strange cliffhanger that to me is almost even more suspenseful. So we will break the suspense and read on to the beginning of chapter 3 so we understand the flow of the story and what's happening. It's a short chapter, even with the add-on of the beginning of chapter 3. We'll notice a few details of the text, and if we end early to return to Passover cleaning and preparations, so be it. So let me share my screen. This is Yechezkel chapter 2, and again, just to remind us that where we left off in the end of chapter 1, Ezekiel's eyes were sort of being cast further and further upward. He saw the feet of this chair and the wings, and then just going back to verse 25, there was a sound from over their heads. So he was looking up, and he saw the semblance of a throne above their heads, and on top of the semblance of the throne, the semblance of a human form, and sort of looked up to see almost the upper body, so to speak, of the semblance of the human form. And it had the appearance of a bow which shines in the clouds on a day of rain. That was its radiant, vision. And then sort of from looking up and up and up, then the reaction to all of it is to cast his face down and throw himself down upon his face. Va'ereh va'epol al panai. When I beheld it, I flung myself down on my face. Va'eshma kol midaber. And I heard a voice speaking. Here they say, translate the voice of someone speaking, a voice of a speaker or a voice speaking. And let's hear what that voice said. Estelle, do you want to start us off with verse 1?
And he said to me, O mortal, stand up on your feet, that I may speak to you. As he spoke to me, a spirit entered into me and set me upon my feet, and I heard what was being spoken to me. He said to me, O mortal, I am sending you to the people of Israel, that nation of rebels who have rebelled against me. They, as well as their fathers, have defied me to this very day. For the sons are brazen of face and stubborn of heart. I send you to them, and you shall say to them, Thus said the Lord God. Whether they listen or not, for they are a rebellious breed, that they may know that there was a prophet among them. And you, mortal, do not fear them, and do not fear their words, though thistles and thorns press against you, and you sit upon scorpions. Do not be afraid of their words, and do not be dismayed by them, though they are a rebellious breed. But speak my words to them, whether they listen or not, for they are rebellious. And you, mortal, heed what I say to you. Do not be rebellious like that rebellious breed. Open your mouth and eat what I am giving you. As I looked, there was a hand stretched out to me, holding a written scroll. He unrolled it before me, and it was inscribed on both the front and the back. On it were written lamentations, dirges, and woes.
Okay, and just read the 3 verses, Estelle.
What? He said to me, Mortal, eat what is offered you. Eat this scroll and go speak to the house of Israel. So I opened my mouth, and he gave me the scroll to eat. as he said to me, mortal, feed your stomach and fill your belly. I'm sorry, I can't see that. And feed your belly with this scroll that I give you. I ate it, and it tasted as sweet as honey to me. Good Lord. Wow.
Wow. So, I mean, two things right away, in terms of phrases that jump out. Of course, this word mortal, Ben Adam, as we mentioned, Yechezkel is pretty much the only person in the Tanakh who's called Ben Adam. Daniel, the prophet Daniel, is once referred to as Ben Adam. Sometimes a collective of people are sort of called collectively, or an individual, anonymous individual is referred to as Ben Adam, but there's no specific person who's called over and over, addressed with the term Ben Adam, other than Yechezkel. That is really a almost entirely unique appellation for him, and so we already hear that repetitively through this chapter, as we will hear it dozens more times through the book of Yechezkel. I think I read, and this is not necessarily so unique. I'm not sure that it's true, how much it's true for other prophets. Moshe, we certainly hear addressed by name, Moshe, but Yechezkel is never called Yechezkel in the book. In other words, the narrator refers to him in the third person, but God never says, you, Yechezkel. God only ever calls him Ben Adam, which is fascinating, and we could speculate on different meanings. Certainly, it's an intentional choice here to translate it as mortal, because Ben Adam literally means son of man. That could be a lofty state. You're not an animal. You are a human. You are regal, a regal human, a son born of man. That could be, a statement of lofty status. Adam, Adam was Adam. Adam was the first human. Ben Adam means descendant of Adam, God's, pinnacle creation, according to some. So it's interesting that JPS chooses the opposite kind of way of thinking about Ben Adam, which is mortal, right? You may be a prophet, you may be receiving the word of God, but you are but a man, but a human. And some of the commentaries suggest that this title is used because Yechezkel is a prophet who really has, in almost a unique way, visions of God. And if you behold God, you may come to think fairly highly of yourself. And if God is always communicating with you, you may come to think highly of yourself. You are the vehicle, the messenger, the mouthpiece of God. So God is always, not in as heavy-handed a way as this, phrase sounds, but kind of cutting Yechezkel down to size, and always addressing him. You're just a human. I'm speaking to you, to deliver my word, but you do so as a human messenger, as a mere mortal. So there really are different ways we might think about this phrase, but it's worth reflecting on because we will encounter it so much. And the other phrase just in this chapter, which comes up so much, is there's two different Hebrew words for it, which is rebellion, the nation of rebels who have rebelled against me. Almost every other verse just about has this term of mordim or meri, terms which are used, certainly meri or morim, rebels, is used in the Chumash. Moshe refers to the Israelites as rebels using that term. So there's sort of these Yechezkel as the mortal and the messenger to this nation, which is described as a nation of rebellious people. It certainly feels like the themes of this chapter. Before we go into some of the specific language beyond these opening two thoughts, happy to pause if anyone has questions or comments just on what we read. Remember the arc of the chapter, which is after that vision, the voice speaks, and the voice's message is, stand up, I'm going to speak to you. These people have been rebellious. They may not listen, but I still have to send you to them. Don't be afraid of them. Speak my words to them. And then this, the last few verses of this chapter into the beginning of the next, which is this scroll with lamentations written on both sides and the instruction to eat the scroll. And Yechezkel eats the scroll, and it's as sweet as honey. So yeah, I see mom and dad, and then Lance. Go ahead. We don't hear you yet. If you can unmute, Dad.
Okay. You mentioned that Moshe referred to the children of Israel as Morim, rebels. Wasn't he punished for saying that?
One of the takes on why he actually was punished, because that was I believe that was at the time where he hit the rock. And there's a big debate when God says to him, since you didn't, you and Aaron did not trust in me to sanctify me. And specifically, the language is lahakdisheni, something like le'enei kol ha'am, to sanctify me in the presence of the people. And so one of the interpretations is that it was kind of the criticism or lack of faith in the people, in a sense, which also dishonored God in their presence, and that it was that heavy language. And there are other midrashim that talk about it as well. But yeah, it does seem, according to some, I don't know if the text ever says it quite explicitly that Moshe is punished for that, but it certainly is one interpretation. Yeah, so but I guess God has license to criticize us in a way that God wouldn't necessarily want even our leaders to criticize us. Right? It's different. Maybe it would feel different if Yechezkel were saying it, but God is the one who's telling Yechezkel to say it. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Lance?
Where does the name Ezekiel come from then?
Where does it come from?
If it's not in the text.
Oh, we do have it in chapter 1. Yes, I was only saying God never addresses Yechezkel by calling Yechezkel Yechezkel.
Well, how
in chapter 1, it begins, the word of the Lord came to the priest Ezekiel, son of Buzi. Chapter 1, verse 3. We do have it there, but I don't think Yechezkel ever calls it himself that, nor does God address him in that way.
How do they address each other? I know many times you say he dreams it, but that doesn't sound as if he's dreaming it.
Right. I mean, if you hear a voice speaking to you, and it says, "Go tell the children of Israel such and such. So says the Lord." Remember, God says often, the prophetic framing is often, "So says the Lord." Now that might be an editor putting that in, but I assume, right? Of course, I'm thinking back, Stell, to with my parents on, to the opportunities that I had growing up to listen to Bill Cosby, the Bill Cosby records, and the Noah routine.
That's a goodie.
And Noah's skeptical at the beginning that it's God, but God says, it's me, it's God. Of course, Noah says, right. So
No, I remember.
that, and in fact, quite beautifully, just for this question, just riffing for a moment, in the beginning of the book of Samuel, Shmuel, as a young man, is brought to the Mishkan in Shiloh to be, an apprentice to the high priest Eli. And he hears a voice calling out to him at night, and he says, "Who is it?" And he's confused, and he goes to Eli and says, "Did you hear anything?" And Eli says, "No." And he says, "I heard a voice calling to me." And, Eli has to sort of teach him that is God once Eli figures it out. So it's not obvious. All of that is just to say it's not obvious. And it's hard to know anything for sure. Let's say that. But I'm going to go back to Lance if you wanted to say more, Lance.
Okay, just an aside. Noah says to God, "God, what shall I do next?" And God says, "Whatever floats your boat." But a couple of things.
Arc.
Yeah, I think the two metaphors here are exceedingly interesting. The scorpion is supposed to be the worst of these crawling insects, whatever you want to call them. And Ezekiel is in the midst of them, and it's a metaphor for the Israelites, right? And it means that Ezekiel is going into a world where his life is in danger.
Yes.
And I think if you go in the Talmud, there are all kinds of things. Beyond that, it goes. And the thing of eating a scroll is such an interesting thing, because in the book of Revelation, John eats a scroll. But and I think there's a Hasidic, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, that says Everybody should eat the scroll.
Eat, do you say EAT? Eat?
It means, I think, that when you study Torah, you should do it with every fiber of your body,
Uh-huh.
rather than just your mind.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
That's just a couple of things in my little research
Beautiful.
unfurled.
Beautiful. Yes. No, well, we will certainly reflect a little more on that point of the consumption of the scroll and what that was all about. So let's come back to the text inside just to notice a few more things. I like that note about the scorpions, and I think we'll see also that this is a theme of kind of introductory prophecies with other prophets as well. So okay, so God says, going back again to the beginning of the chapter, Ben Adam, we have that address to Yechezkel, and we have an interesting charge here. Amod al raglecha va'adaber otach. Right, stand up on your feet that I may speak to you. Right, so remember, why does God have to tell him that? Because having beheld the image, the vision that he beheld in the end of the previous chapter, he flung his face onto the ground. He fell on his face and heard this voice, and the voice says, stand up so I can speak to you. And it's kind of interesting. We imagine that prophets may have, if they receive prophecies in a dreamlike state, they might very well have been lying down. Certainly, in whatever we see today of ecstatic prophecy, talking in tongues, these kinds of things, often people are thrown to the ground by the kind of experienced force or power of the Spirit, which they experience as overtaking them. And so here God sort of says, like, no, I actually, I want you to stand up to talk to me. Is the sense, is that particular to this prophecy? Is it part of God's training Yechezkel to sort of say, like, you actually, to receive the prophecy, you need to be strong. You're going to have to get used to, again, whether all the prophecies that Yechezkel has come along with these visions or not, you're going to have to get used to the fact that there's something rather overwhelming and forceful and dynamic when I speak to you. And I want you to kind of strengthen yourself. This, by the way, in a sense, reflects then what comes next, because then, first of all, what's interesting is, does Yechezkel get himself up or not? Verse 2 then says, as God spoke to me, a spirit entered me, vatavovi ruach. Ruach could mean divine spirit, could mean wind. Some of the commentaries say he was like lifted up by a wind. We have that sense in other prophecies. Vata'amideni al raglai, the Spirit set me upon my feet. Va'eshma et midaber elai, and I heard what was being spoken to me. So what exactly does happen next? It actually doesn't sound like Yechezkel got up on his own, but it seems like he was assisted to get up, whether by wind or by the divine Spirit entering him, which then gives him strength. Almost sort of, a fascinating way to think about it might be when he looks up and sees God above him, so to speak, he's overwhelmed. Oh, that was interesting. When I put up my hand, I got a little
How could he see?
icon. Let's make that go away. When Yechezkel looks up and beholds God, he's overtaken and he falls down. When God enters him, so to speak, then he's strengthened and stands up. So maybe it is a little, without being overly sermonic, when we think about ourselves as separate from God, we could feel overtaken by God. But when we think about ourselves as in relationship with God, we can feel, strengthened and capable, in a sense. So maybe that's part of what's going on here. But one way or another, he's up. And he's then able to hear. Now, whether that's because God really waited till he was up to speak, or whether actually kind of once he could only hear the message when he was standing. So that's when he was able to actually comprehend what was being said. Again, these are all little hints, little tiny data points for thinking about what was the experience of the prophets in prophecy. Then God gives him the basic message, which is, sholeach ani otcha, I'm sending you. You are a shaliach, you are a messenger of mine to speak to the people of Israel, who are called here El Goyim Hamordim asher marduvi, that nation of rebels. It's interesting that it's plural. It almost sounds like the nations that are rebelling. You know, my homiletical instinct goes to the fact that sometimes we have many nations within our nation. We don't all get along. We're not all unified. They and their fathers have defied me to this day. Hema va'avotam pashuvi, not a very common verb for sin in the Tanach, pashuvi, but it did, of course, immediately send me in my mind to Isaiah chapter 1, the opening prophecy of Isaiah, at least in the order of the book, where God begins by saying, I'm turning back to verse 2, the very first line of God's prophecy to Isaiah. Hear, O heavens, and give ear, O earth, for the Lord has spoken. Banim gidalti v'romamti, I reared children and brought them up. Vehem pashuvi, and they have rebelled against me. So fascinating to hear the chapter 1 prophecy of Isaiah and the chapter 2, only because the first chapter is the vision. The first chapter of God's words to Ezekiel share this common phrase of Heim pashuvi, they as well as their fathers have sinned against me, have defied me, adetzem hayom hazeh, until today. And then we have I haven't checked this in the concordance, but it kind of strikes me as unusual description. First, v'habanim, the sons. That also takes us exactly back to the verse we saw in Isaiah. Kishei fanim, brazen of face. Normally we hear kishei oref, right, stiff-necked. The back of their neck is tough, but here they're called hard-faced, tough-faced. Maybe this is a little, flight of fancy thought here. Specifically, the notion of face is interesting in light of the previous chapter, in which we had all those faces. Every leg of the chariot of the throne, whatever it is, had the 4 faces on each side. One of them was a human face. So, in reaction to a vision in which we have all these obedient faces, we're told that God's children, unlike the angelic presences that surround God's throne, God's children are hard-faced. They're not able to kind of turn themselves towards God. The chizkei leiv, that already takes us to Paro. Who else has a hardened heart, a stubborn heart, other than Paro? So these are really, really damning kinds of descriptions. And it's to those people, God now repeats what God said in the beginning of verse 3, Sholeach ani. It's to those people, Ani sholeach otcha, that I'm sending you to them. And here's what you're supposed to say to them. So said the Lord. And then God sort of, interrupts God's own self, and says, here's what he's supposed to say to them. So said the Lord. Now, hold on a second. Doesn't even matter if they're going to listen or not. You have to just literally speak in my name, because they're rebels. They may not listen, but they have to know that there was a prophet amongst them. Of course, this is what Jeremiah said so many times. I sent, God said, through Jeremiah, I sent them prophets, day and night. Even if they're not going to listen, you got to still show up and speak. And then, having said that to Ezekiel, the idea that they might not listen, and you still have to go anyway, Ezekiel may be a little uneasy then. What's it going to be like to deliver messages that are not going to be heard? How are they going to respond? And so God says to him again, V'ata ben adam al tira mehem. Don't be afraid of them. Umidivreihem al tira. Don't be afraid of their words, meaning you will have what you might be afraid of, because they're going to be, so rejecting of me, and therefore likely so rejecting of you. They're going to have harsh words in response. Don't be afraid. This, as we're bouncing back and forth between the first Ezekiel prophecy recorded in the book and the first Isaiah prophecy recorded in the book, now, of course, we go back to the first Jeremiah prophecy recorded in the book, in which God also says to him, I've appointed you against other nations, and says, jumping up a moment, Al tira mipneihem, don't be afraid of them. So that message to a prophet, don't be afraid of the people that you're going to deliver your words to, Ezekiel and Jeremiah both get in their first recorded prophecies. Don't be afraid, even though thistles and thorns press against you and you sit upon scorpions. You're right, the harshness, as Lance described, these are sort of metaphors for the prophet amongst the Israelites. Don't be afraid of their words. speak my words to them. We have all these davar. We have, don't be afraid of them. Umidivrehem. And again, midivrehem, don't be afraid. And instead, dibarta et devarai alehem. Don't be afraid of their words, because you're going to be delivering my words to them, whether they listen or not, which they might not, because they're rebellious. And then, kind of the third piece, they're rebellious, deliver my words, don't be afraid of them. Vata ben adam, you heed what I say to you. Al tihi meri keveta meri. Don't be rebellious like them. Meaning, you have to be tough. You may be afraid for your own well-being, and you may, not be able to stand your ground. But if you don't stand your ground, you become a rebel against me just like they are. And I now want, you to strengthen yourself. So whereas in the beginning of the chapter, the Ruach entered, the Spirit of God, now it becomes even more embodied and physical. And I want you to open your mouth and eat what I'm going to give you. And what is it that God gives? So Yechezkel looks and sees Yad Shelucha Elai, a hand stretched out to me, almost the language of Passover of the mighty hand and the outstretched arms, slightly different. Yad Shelucha, the same language as how God told him, I'm sending you to the Israelites. So now God's hand is sent out, or a hand is sent out to Ezekiel, and it has a scroll, a written scroll, Megillat Sefer. That hand unrolled it in front of me. It was written, how we again get the word panim, written on the front and on the back. There's a special word for this, which I saw on the 929 page, and I can't remember, for a scroll written on the front and the back, because, paper was, or whatever scroll material they had, was not so easy to come by. So to get the most out of the space, people would sometimes write on the front and back. And on it were written dirges, lamentations, and woes, these sort of terrible, terrible, mournful messages. And now God clarifies, right? So God said, eat what I'm going to give you. It was a scroll that God gave. So you can imagine Ezekiel saying, like, wait a minute, I'm supposed to eat this? So that's why God has to circle back around and be very, very clear. Eat this, right? That which you have, eat. But that's a scroll. Okay, eat the scroll. Echol tamigila hazot, right? It sounds a little repetitive. Eat what is offered you, eat the scroll. It's because it's so unbelievable. And you can imagine Yechezkel being so incredulous. I'm really supposed to eat this scroll? Yes, eat it and go speak to the house of Israel. And Ezekiel complies. V'aftach et pi, v'ya'achileni. The hand fed him, so he was stood up, he was spoken to, he was fed this scroll. And God said, fill your belly. By the way, a little bit this evokes the Sota ritual, not that Yechezkel was unfaithful, but the Sota ritual, which is the ritual of the suspected unfaithful wife, where she is fed waters on which a piece of paper that has God's name has been kind of melted. So the word of God's name is in this water, and the water is drunk. That's the closest, scriptural, literally analogy I can think of to this. And in a sense, maybe it's not that Yechezkel is suspected of being unfaithful, but in a sense, it's the worry that he might be tempted not to be faithful that's in the background. And God is sort of saying, I can tell you till I'm blue in the face to follow my word, but if you have my words inside of you, you're less likely to, run the risk of rebelling against me. That's the argument. So, God feeds it. And then I feel like the ending is kind of surprising with all this drama and fear and threat. We wouldn't necessarily expect Yechezkel's response, but his response is, I ate it, vatihi befi kidvash lematok, and it tasted as sweet as honey to me. Maybe I've never seen this connection, but the idea that children, one of the customs of introducing Torah to children is we have the tablet with the letters of the alphabet, and on each letter is a little drop of honey. Maybe in a sense it evokes Ezekiel's first prophecy in which he eats the words of God and they taste like honey. So it's a really, really rich chapter. Happy to hear more questions, comments, and reactions. Yep, Estelle, please.
Wouldn't it be better to say absorb? When you say eat, that's a physical thing. There is no way I mean, anybody, I mean, a real true believer could never in his wildest dreams. If God is amorphous, if it has no body, how can he eat? I mean, if they said absorb, I think they would probably be more believable, or more you can take it in better. What do you think?
No pun intended on that. Take it in better.
Well,
yeah. Like,
I can't bear it. I can't listen.
yeah.
I can't. I
I
mean,
mean,
if there's no God is amorphous, he doesn't have a form. How could you take it? How could you? Why is it gives him a body and a person and
right. Right.
a,
So of course you can resort, and I'd be very, very curious if this is included anywhere, and if anyone has explored this, if what the Rambam's take on this is. The Rambam says that according to the Rambam, many biblical passages that are narrated as though they're happening in real time really were prophecies, and even ones that would really surprise you. I think the Rambam says that the whole experience of the visitors that come to Abraham after his circumcision, and he gives them a meal, and they tell him that Sarah's going to have a baby. The Rambam says that was all a dream. That was all a vision. The people did not actually exist in real life. So I wonder whether the Rambam would say about something like this, it was all a dream, meaning he pictured
it has to
the
be.
hand, and he dreamt
It
himself
has
doing
to
it.
be.
I mean,
Yeah.
I would say there is some suspension of disbelief / faith, that is required for taking all of prophecy at its word. And so at some level, the idea that God speaks to human beings is not more unbelievable to me than the idea of a human being eating a scroll. But I understand what you're saying, especially with the hand stretching out to offer it. It's like, well, how could that be happening in real awake life? It's certainly hard. It's certainly hard to believe, imagine, or understand. I don't disagree with you about that at all. Yeah, Lance?
Wow.
Okay, a couple of points here. Number one, my memory serves in the book of Kings, Saul is inhabited by an evil spirit. And to psychologists, that means he's an aggressive depressive. And here, the spirit goes to Ezekiel, and it seems to be a very positive thing. And it's just an inconsistency.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I just want to point out is that you're using intertextuality. And I think that was a point that the rabbi we study on Monday night makes, right?
Yes, Rabbi David Foreman. Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. This morning I went to the Siyum B'Churim, and
The what? I'm sorry, Lance. The what?
The excuse, the workaround to get you out, the firstborn to get out of fasting, which is what happened to Rav Stephen. And the rabbi said that false prophets are executed. Is that correct?
Were you at the early tefillah? I was at the late tefillah.
No, I was in Hewlett, New York.
Okay.
It's different.
Yes,
Totally
I mean the Dvarim certainly says that false prophets are executed. Yes.
And he also mentioned that there's a situation in which a real true prophet does not want to speak the words of God. And the example was Jonah.
Mm-hmm.
But here you have Ezekiel, obviously, is neither one. But the thought I had was, to the Israelites, what if they see Ezekiel as a false prophet? Then they're going to kill him, right?
Is he a false prophet?
Right.
No, absolutely not. But
Right.
I'm saying,
I think that's what was going on. With Jeremiah at certain moments also. Arguably, it wasn't just that they didn't like what he was saying, but they were saying he's a false prophet and therefore he should be put to death. Yeah.
Right. The next point I'd like to make is that eating can mean dominate or defeat someone. So that the metaphor of it's really a kind of code, if you will. And Ezekiel is told that he should be someone who dominates or defeats these rebels. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me that when you're talking about anthropomorphic theophany, which we've got here in spades, you're really talking about poetry. And one thing, instead of seeing God as either invisible or as an anthropomorphic theophany, you can see God as embedded in the world and, in effect, controlling everything from an embedded position, so that it's what Rabbi Nachmanides calls hidden miracles.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Okay, and finally, there are those who believe that the ultimate position of a prophet is telling truth to power. And that's what the Greeks call parahistus. And for Michel Foucault, a parahistus, telling truth to power, is above the prophet.
Beautiful.
Just a few thoughts.
Above the prophet?
Yep.
Like higher than prophecy is.
For
I mean,
the
I understand.
French philosopher.
I understand what you're saying, but I didn't think anything was above the prophet.
How about Moses? Doesn't Moses tell truth to Pharaoh?
Yeah, but he's not believed.
What?
All right. Well, more to discuss and unpack on that, but we'll leave that here for now. We're going to go to Ellen and then Graham.
The phrase that really strikes me is "stand up so that I can speak to you."
Yeah.
And
Goody.
I get the feeling, maybe I'm wrong, but it's that God does not want us to debase ourselves. We should not be prostrate continually before God. We bow, but we then stand straight. Even on Rosh Hashanah, on Yom Kippur, when we kneel and bow, we then get up. And there's, if you make a covenant, if you make a contract with somebody, it has to be between people who have some say in it. And if you're just prostrate, you can't have a say in anything.
That's good.
And so, I mean, I'm really struck by that. I just love that phrase. Stand up so I can talk to you. Take a step. Be a person so that I can speak to you.
Yeah, I love
I think
that.
that's a very good point.
Yeah, yeah. You sort of it gets back to, I think, a classic debate that I very much feel and think about. I sometimes cite this kind of Hasidic teaching about nullification of the self, that the ultimate service of God is nullification of the self. And the counter to that is, if you have no self, what are you serving God with, and how are you encountering God? And it doesn't mean, of course, the other extreme of being full of yourself, then there's no room left for God. But the idea that obviously there's some golden mean there, which is you have to have a sense of self. You have to be standing up, upright and sturdy, in order to have a stance to interact and relate with God as a real substantive person. So I love that reading of kind of stand up and establish yourself in a sense so that I can speak to you. There has to be something there to speak to. Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, Graham.
Okay, but I got another poem.
Great.
Would you like to hear
We're
it?
ready. We're ready.
It's well, we all are fragile, small and thin. Where we are is where we've been. A rainbow rings the throne of God. The angels teach with staff and rod. Feed your soul with kind regard, without pretensions or facade. Taste the sweetness of being alive. With every heartbeat, strive and thrive. Speaking the word sustains your soul. The taste is sweet that's on the scroll. So don't be afraid when shadows fall. Your sweet laughter conquers all. But if you lie and stories tell, you'll eat my words. You'll eat your words and mine as well.
Graham,
I don't know how you do it,
you
Graham.
are
You
incredible.
capture the spirit of these chapters so beautifully with those words. Thank you.
Did you? It just came right out of your head?
No, I'm not. I'm listening, and then I'm just kind of picking these words, following the conversation, and then rhyming.
Could you,
You want that in the
Yes,
chat?
Yeah,
please.
put it into the chat.
Could
We'll
you,
share it.
Okay, let's
not in the
go.
chat, I can never access it.
No, but
Send it.
if Graham puts it in the chat, then we'll put it in the email.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Let me get this thing.
You are absolutely the most incredible person I know. It's just unbelievable.
Well,
Great. It's great. Carl, go ahead.
Why don't you convert?
Just the
I knew that was coming.
comments. This image of telling someone to eat covers, I mean, it's a very broad image. On the one hand, like we all remember telling our kids, you got to eat it, right? As authority.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if you've ever been to a tish, the Rebbe hands out something to eat, which is supposed to be like a blessing. And interestingly enough, this has both aspects to it, right? On the first hand, God is telling him to eat. It's an assertion of power. You got to do this, okay? Which clearly he would obviously be reluctant to, and it has to be repeated. But then when he eats it, it turns out that no, it's not something that he's being forced to do against his will. Anybody would eat something that tastes like honey and stuff. So we have both those images, both those aspects of the command to eat show up in this one spot.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Great. It's such a rich, unusual language, and really invites a lot of possible interpretation. Thank you. It looks like we're going to circle back to Lance and then get ready to wrap up, unless I missed
Okay,
anyone.
I just like to make the point that Jewish ritual is filled with standing and sitting, going up and down.
Yes.
You just think of Aleinu, you think of Borchu, you think of the Shemon Esrei, you think of the Torah rising. When Torah rises, you rise. Torah sits, you sit. And and certainly Aleinu on Rosh Hashanah and Kippur, you have this situation where you're prostrate, which supposedly was done in the temple, and there was always room to do it, which is one of the interesting side effects there. But it almost as if Jewish liturgy, I was thinking about this, Jewish ritual is a wave going up and down like water. Just a few
That's
thoughts.
interesting.
Beautiful.
Jewish ritual is a wave. I never thought of it that way. I always
Neither
thought
did I.
ritual was just something made up so that you should remember it.
Right.
That's also very evocative, that sort of sense of the up and down, standing and sitting, the wave movement. Great. Just looking across the Zoom if I missed anybody who wanted to comment.
What's interesting is everybody can feel, I come from so outside that everything is so new and strange and questioning. Wow.
Lots to explore and discover. And let me wish everybody a Chag Kasher v'Sameach, a good Pesach. We still have a couple days of preparations left. If there's anything you need, please don't hesitate to be in touch with me. And it's wonderful to be starting off a new book to begin our journey with Yechezkel as we get ready. Here's a little challenge. See if you can find Yechezkel in the Haggadah. Yechezkel is quoted on the course of the Seder night. So that's our optional homework is to find Yechezkel in the Haggadah, and my homework is to see if I even remember that I gave that homework, so that when we get back together in 2 Thursdays, we can see if we discovered it. And just want to make sure I copy Graham's words into
Yes, please.
so we can share them with others. And there we go. All right. Looking forward to having my parents up here in Riverdale later today. Safe travels and love and Chag Kasher v'Sameach to all.
Chag Sameach.
Thank you. Chag Sameach.
Hak Shameach.
Bye-bye.